On July 20, 1969, 500 million people around the world watched history unfold on their television screens. Neil Armstrong's One Small Step for Man became, in that instant, the most watched event in human history. And it happened because of television, the technology that brought the moon into living rooms from Salt Lake City to Sao Paulo. In one of those living rooms sat a 62-year-old man and his wife. They had watched television transform from a dream into a global force. They had watched it bring wars into homes, topple presidents, change the way humanity understood itself. But this moment was different. The man turned to his wife and said something he had never said before. "Pem, this has made it all worthwhile." His name was Philo Farnsworth. He invented electronic television, and for most of his life he wondered if it had been worth the cost. This is his story. Philo Taylor Farnsworth was born on August 19, 1906, in a log cabin near Beaver, Utah, a cabin built by his grandfather, a Mormon pioneer who had followed Brigham Young into the wilderness. It was the Old West. His father drove a stagecoach. There was no electricity, no telephone, no indoor plumbing. At night, the family read by candlelight. But Philo was different from the other children in those isolated Utah valleys. From the moment he could walk, he was taking things apart to see how they worked. He was fascinated by machines, by electricity, by the invisible forces that seemed to animate the modern world. And then, at age 6, something happened that would shape the rest of his life. Philo saw a locomotive, the massive machine, breathing steam and fire, thundering across the landscape. It was the most incredible thing he had ever witnessed. From that moment on, he knew what he wanted to be: an inventor. In 1918, when Philo was 11, the Farnsworth family moved to a relative's 240-acre ranch near Rigby, Idaho. And that's when everything changed. The new house had electricity. For a boy who had spent his entire life in candlelit darkness, it was like stepping into the future. There were lights, motors, machines that ran on this invisible force he had only read about. Philo immediately began exploring. He fixed the troublesome Delco generator that powered the farm. He found a burned-out electric motor in a pile of junk left by previous tenants, rewound its armature, and brought it back to life. He converted his mother's hand-powered washing machine into an electric one, and then he found the attic. It was filled with stacks of old science magazines: Popular Science, Science and Invention, the Radio Experimenter's magazine. Page after page of diagrams, inventions, and dreams of the future. One topic appeared again and again: television. The idea of transmitting moving pictures through the air, the way radio transmitted sound. Scientists around the world were racing to make it work. But they were all using the same approach: mechanical systems with spinning discs and mirrors. And Philo Farnsworth, reading alone in an Idaho attic, knew they were all wrong. The moment that changed television and the world happened in the summer of 1921. Philo was 14 years old, plowing a potato field with a horse-drawn harrow, back and forth, row after row. The harrow cutting straight, parallel lines in the dark Idaho soil, and then it hit him. What if you could scan an image the same way? Line by line, row by row. Break a picture down into parallel lines of light, convert those lines into electrons, transmit them through the air, and reassemble them at the other end. The mechanical systems everyone was using could never move fast enough. But electrons could move at nearly the speed of light. Only electrons could capture, transmit, and reproduce a moving image. In that potato field, a 14-year-old farm boy conceived the idea that would make modern television possible. He just had to prove it. The following spring, Philo entered high school. He was already years ahead of his classmates in science, devouring physics and chemistry with an intensity that startled his teachers. He begged to be allowed into senior-level courses. Eventually, they relented. One day after class, his chemistry teacher, Justin Tallman, walked into his classroom and found something unexpected. Philo Farnsworth was standing before a blackboard covered with electrical diagrams and equations. "What has this to do with chemistry?" Tallman asked. Philo took a breath. "I've got this idea. I've got to tell you about it because you're the only person I know who can understand it." He paused. "This is my idea for electronic television." For the next hour, the 14-year-old explained his vision: a system that would scan images electronically, transmit them as a stream of electrons, and recreate them on a screen. Tallman was astonished. He encouraged the boy to pursue his idea, and he did something else, something that would prove crucial decades later. He kept a copy of Philo's diagram. In 1923, the Farnsworth family moved again, this time to Provo, Utah. Philo enrolled at Brigham Young High School, still dreaming of television, still working on his ideas. Then, in January 1924, his father died of pneumonia. He was 58 years old. Philo was 17. Suddenly, he was the head of the family, responsible for supporting his mother and 4 younger siblings. He finished high school and briefly enrolled at Brigham Young University, desperate to continue his scientific education. But he couldn't afford to stay. He dropped out after 2 years, taking jobs wherever he could find them, delivering radios, doing electrical repairs, working for the community chest in Salt Lake City. His dreams of television seemed impossibly far away, but he never stopped thinking about it. And in that community chest office, he met 2 men who would change his life. George Iverson and Leslie Gorel were professional fundraisers from California in Utah to run a charity campaign. They needed a young man to help with clerical work. Philo got the job. Iverson noticed something different about this young clerk. During breaks, Philo would talk endlessly about science, about electrons, about a system he had designed to transmit moving pictures through the air. Most people would have dismissed it as fantasy. Iverson was intrigued. He asked Philo to explain his television system. The young man did, in detail, with diagrams, with the same intensity he had shown Justin Tallman 4 years earlier. Iverson was convinced. So was Gorel. They offered to invest their life savings, $6,000, to fund Philo's experiments. There was one condition. Philo would have to move to California to be closer to potential investors and the motion picture industry. Philo agreed, but first he had something else to do. Her name was Elma Gardner, but everyone called her Pem. She was 18 years old, the girl next door, literally. The Farnsworth and Gardner families had been neighbors in Provo. Philo proposed to her in 1926, but this was no ordinary proposal. "I have to be honest with you," he told her. "There's another woman in my life." Pem's heart sank. Her name is television. Pem said yes anyway. On their wedding night, Philo made another confession. "Together, we'll be working right on the leading edge of discovery." He meant it literally. He trained her to do technical drawing, spot welding, and to type his lab notes. She would work alongside him in the laboratory, documenting every experiment, every breakthrough, every failure. Those notebooks, typed by Pem Farnsworth, would eventually become the crucial evidence that proved her husband invented television. In the fall of 1926, the Farnsworths arrived in San Francisco. Iverson had secured an additional $25,000 from the Crocker First National Bank, along with a small space for a laboratory. The address was 202 Green Street, at the corner of Sansom, in the shadow of Telegraph Hill. It wasn't much, a small loft space, cramped and poorly ventilated, but it was enough. Philo assembled a tiny team, Pem, her brother Cliff Gardner, and a few young assistants. They had no formal training in high-vacuum physics. They had almost no money. They were trying to accomplish what the world's greatest corporations and universities had failed to do. They were trying to capture light in a bottle. For over a year, they worked. Failed. Adjusted. Tried again. The challenge was the image dissector, Philo's design for a camera tube that could convert an optical image into a stream of electrons. They struggled with vacuum seals, with focusing the electron beam, with 100 technical problems that no one had ever solved before. But on September 7, 1927, everything came together. Philo positioned a glass slide with a single line scratched into it in front of the image dissector. In the next room, a receiver waited. The line appeared on the screen. It was faint, primitive, just a single horizontal line, but it was the first fully electronic television transmission in history. Philo turned to his small team and said, "That's it, folks, there you have electronic television." Iverson sent a telegram to Gorel with a single sentence, "The damn thing works." The investors were getting anxious. They had poured tens of thousands of dollars into Philo's experiments. They wanted to see results, specifically, results that might translate into profits. One day, James Fagan, one of the money men, showed up at Green Street demanding a demonstration. "When are we going to see some dollars in this thing?" he asked. Philo had an idea. He positioned a glass slide in front of the image dissector. On the slide was a simple image, a dollar sign. In the next room, on the glowing blue receiver, the dollar sign appeared. The investors laughed. They understood, and they kept investing. Word of Farnsworth's achievement spread quickly. By 1928, his system was good enough for public demonstrations. Reporters came to see the young inventor and his miraculous machine. The San Francisco Chronicle ran a headline, S.F. Man's Invention to Revolutionize Television. Even Hollywood took notice. Silent film legends Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks visited Farnsworth's laboratory. They watched demonstrations of the new technology. They marveled at the moving images appearing on the small screen. Then they left, convinced that television posed no threat to the motion picture industry. They were wrong. But someone else was watching Farnsworth's progress with far greater concern. His name was David Sarnoff, and he was building an empire. Sarnoff had arrived in America as a poor Jewish immigrant from Russia at age 9. By sheer determination and ruthless ambition, he had risen to become president of the Radio Corporation of America, RCA, the most powerful communications company in the world. RCA dominated radio. It controlled the patents, the manufacturing, the broadcasting networks. NBC was an RCA subsidiary. You couldn't build or sell a radio in America without paying royalties to RCA. Sarnoff understood that television was the future, and he had no intention of letting that future belong to anyone else. He had his own television research program, led by a Russian-born engineer named Vladimir Zworykin. But Zworykin was struggling. His mechanical systems weren't working. He needed a breakthrough. When Sarnoff heard about a young inventor in San Francisco who had actually demonstrated electronic television, he made a decision. If he couldn't beat Farnsworth, he would buy him, and if he couldn't buy him, he would destroy him. In April 1930, Vladimir Zworykin requested permission to visit Philo Farnsworth's laboratory. He claimed he was simply curious about Farnsworth's work. He presented himself as a fellow scientist, interested in comparing notes. Farnsworth agreed to the visit. He was proud of his work and eager to share it with other researchers. For 3 days, Zworykin examined everything. Farnsworth showed him the image dissector, explained how it worked, demonstrated his techniques for sealing vacuum tubes and focusing electron beams. Pem even made him dinner. What Farnsworth didn't know was that Zworykin was there as a spy for RCA. When Zworykin returned to New York, he sent a detailed report to Sarnoff. Within weeks, RCA engineers were building copies of Farnsworth's designs. The war had begun. In 1931, David Sarnoff himself traveled to San Francisco to meet Philo Farnsworth. Sarnoff was impressed. Farnsworth's system was clearly superior to anything RCA had developed. The young inventor held over a dozen patents that RCA would need to manufacture televisions. Sarnoff made an offer, $100,000 for all of Farnsworth's patents, with one condition. Farnsworth would have to come work for RCA. Farnsworth refused. He had spent his entire life working toward this moment. He wasn't going to hand his invention to a corporation and become just another employee. Sarnoff was not accustomed to hearing no. He returned to New York and gave new orders to his legal department: destroy Philo Farnsworth. What followed was one of the most brutal corporate attacks in American history. RCA filed patent interference lawsuits claiming that Zworykin's 1923 patent application, filed before Farnsworth's, though never successfully demonstrated, gave RCA priority over electronic television. The lawsuits dragged on for years. Farnsworth was forced to defend himself against the most powerful corporation in America, with its army of lawyers and unlimited resources. His investors grew nervous. Philco, which had partnered with him, was threatened by RCA and abandoned him in 1933. His funding dried up. And in the middle of it all, tragedy struck. In March 1932, Farnsworth's young son, Kenny, died. Philco refused to give him time off to bury his child. It was the beginning of a depression that would shadow him for the rest of his life. RCA's lawyers were confident. They argued that it was impossible, simply impossible, for a self-taught farm boy to have invented something as complex as electronic television at age 14. How could a kid from Idaho have conceived of this technology before the greatest scientists in the world? Then Justin Tallman walked into the courtroom. Farnsworth's high school chemistry teacher had kept the diagram his student had drawn on the blackboard 13 years earlier. It showed, in unmistakable detail, the same image dissector that Farnsworth had built in San Francisco, conceived years before Zworykin filed his patent. In 1935, the U.S. Patent Office ruled in Farnsworth's favor. Philo T. Farnsworth was the undisputed inventor of electronic television. Farnsworth had won, but winning had cost him everything. The legal battles had drained his resources. His patents would expire in 1947, just 20 years after his first demonstration, and only 7 years away. Sarnoff, meanwhile, was preparing for triumph. At the 1939 New York World's Fair, RCA erected a massive television pavilion. Sarnoff stood before cameras and announced to the world that RCA was launching commercial television broadcasting. He made no mention of Philo Farnsworth. To the millions who visited the World's Fair, it appeared that RCA, and RCA alone, had invented television. RCA did eventually pay Farnsworth $1 million for the right to use his patents. It was the first time in RCA history that the company had paid royalties to an outside inventor. But it was too little, too late. And then came the war. In 1941, the United States government ordered a halt to commercial television production. All resources were redirected to the war effort. Farnsworth's company was sold to International Telephone and Telegraph. He worked on military applications, radar, infrared technology, submarine detection, but he was no longer building the future he had imagined. His television patents expired in 1947, just as the war ended and the television boom began. The technology Farnsworth invented would transform the world, but he would never profit from it. RCA manufactured 80% of the television sets sold in America. The Radio and Television Manufacturers Association named David Sarnoff father of television in 1950. Philo Farnsworth's name was barely mentioned. Farnsworth had dreamed that television would unite humanity. If we were able to see people in other countries and learn about our differences, he once said, why would there be any misunderstandings? War would be a thing of the past. Instead, he watched his invention become, in the words of FCC Chairman Newton Minow, a vast wasteland. He grew to hate what television had become. He refused to allow his children to watch it. I suppose you could say that he felt he had created kind of a monster, his son Kent later recalled. A way for people to waste a lot of their lives. Farnsworth turned to other pursuits. He invented a baby incubator, a gastroscope, an air traffic control system that became the basis for modern aviation safety. And in his final years, he became obsessed with something even more ambitious than television, nuclear fusion. The Farnsworth fusor was unlike anything anyone had ever built. It used inertial electrostatic confinement to fuse atomic nuclei, the same process that powers the sun. Farnsworth believed it could be the basis for unlimited clean energy. He worked on fusion for years, achieving small-scale reactions that amazed his colleagues, but he could never secure enough funding to take it further. In 1967, ITT cut his budget entirely. The fusor project was dead. Farnsworth returned to Utah, to Brigham Young University, trying to continue his research with whatever resources he could find. But his health was failing. The depression that had haunted him since his son's death had grown worse. He turned to alcohol. The boy who had dreamed of capturing light in a bottle was running out of time. In his entire life, Philo Farnsworth appeared on television exactly once. On July 3, 1957, he was a mystery guest on the CBS quiz show, I've Got a Secret. His secret was flashed on millions of television screens across America. I invented electronic television. The celebrity panelists asked questions, trying to guess who he was and what he had done. None of them recognized him. For stumping the panel, Philo Farnsworth received $80 and a carton of Winston cigarettes. It was the only public recognition television ever gave to the man who made it possible. And then came the moon. Philo and Pem Farnsworth sat in their living room, watching Walter Cronkite narrate humanity's greatest achievement. The technology that made this moment possible, the cameras, the transmission systems, the receivers in 500 million homes, bore Farnsworth's fingerprints on every circuit. When Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface, Philo turned to his wife. Pem, he said, this has made it all worthwhile. Before then, she later said, he wasn't too sure. Philo Farnsworth died on March 11, 1971, in Salt Lake City, Utah. He was 64 years old. His death received little notice. A small obituary in the New York Times, a few paragraphs in the local papers. The man who had invented the most powerful communications technology in human history died in debt, largely forgotten. But Pem Farnsworth refused to let his story disappear. For the next 35 years, until her own death in 2006, she fought to restore her husband's place in history. Slowly, the world began to remember. A statue of Farnsworth was placed in the National Statuary Hall in Washington, D.C., one of only 2 inventors so honored. The U.S. Postal Service issued a stamp bearing his image. He was inducted into the Television Academy Hall of Fame, the National Inventors Hall of Fame, and the San Francisco Hall of Fame. Aaron Sorkin wrote a Broadway play about his battle with RCA. The character Professor Farnsworth on Futurama was named in his honor. And every time someone turns on a television, or a computer monitor, or a smartphone screen, they are using technology that began in the mind of a 14-year-old farm boy, plowing a potato field in Idaho. Today, there are more than 2 billion television sets in the world. Add computers, tablets, and smartphones, and the number of devices using Farnsworth's fundamental technology exceeds the human population. Television has done exactly what Farnsworth feared and exactly what he hoped. It has wasted countless hours. It has spread misinformation and triviality. It has been a vast wasteland. But it has also shown us the moon. It has brought wars into our living rooms and turned distant strangers into neighbors. It has toppled dictators and crowned heroes. It has made the world smaller and perhaps a little more human. All of it, every pixel, every broadcast, every screen, traces back to a moment in 1921 when a 14-year-old boy saw the future in the furrows of a plowed field. Philo T. Farnsworth never became rich. He never became famous in his lifetime. He watched a corporation take credit for his work and profit from his genius. But he changed the world. And that, in the end, made it all worthwhile.